Hi, this is Philosophy 70, and this is the lecture beginning the section on ethics. As always, you should have your book out in front of you so that you can have the terminology easily accessible in case you're confused on the spelling of something or to help you with your notes. So ethics, what's that about? Well, ethics is about your moral value. It asks some important questions. For example, how should I live my life? I think that is probably the most important question a person should ask in their life. How should I live my life? What kind of person should I be? Should I be, what is considered a good person? Well, if I decide I should be a good person, how do I figure out what it means to be good? Is it about developing a good character? Or is it just about doing good actions? Or perhaps it's about following my human nature. How do I know any of that? So we're going to look at some traditional theories on how to decide what is right and what is wrong morally. We will be doing philosophical ethics, which is based on reason and experience. We will not be doing theological ethics because theological ethics is essentially based on religious faith. So we can look at that fairly simply. Theological ethics means an ethics based on what your sacred writings prescribe. If your scriptures say don't do this, then that's wrong. If it says do this, then that's right. So it's fairly straightforward. So we'll be doing philosophical ethics, not theological ethics. And again, philosophical ethics are based on reason and experience. What can reason tell me? In other words, I can look at what's going on in the world. Can look on at things around me, and I can see maybe better ways to do things. Experience will also tell me then, well, that didn't work. Oh, well, we had an ethics based on everyone does whatever they want to do. That seems to be a problem because a lot of people do things that might hurt other people. So another question then that we want to ask is, how do I treat other people? If you lived alone in the world and there was no other living thing, you wouldn't need to have a moral code. You could do whatever you want. The rocks wouldn't care and the water wouldn't care. You do what you want. But we don't live in that world. We live in a world with other living things. So why should we be moral? Well, because there are practical reasons and social effects, and we want to maybe achieve a better life. So we'll have different theories based on some of that. So is there a criteria for judgments of good and bad? Well, it turns out different philosophers have different criteria. Some will look at consequences. Some will look at your motive or your intention. Some will look at just formal applications, like here's a rule, always follow it. So these are some of the things we'll be looking at, and some of the questions we'll be trying to answer. How should I live my life? We start off with Aristotle. Aristotle was a student of Plato, um, and it's not that he actually gave us the first ideas about ethics. Philosophers since the beginning of philosophy, and actually even before that, people were concerned about ethical issues. Aristotle, who was born in 384 and lived to 322 BCE, is the place where we will start because he really gives us the first compact, complete theory all neatly put together for us to understand. And he answers all of those questions we were asking. He wrote a book called the Nicomachean Ethics. Nicomachean means for Nicomachus. Nicomachus was Aristotle's son. And I think it's kind of cute because the book is, here for his son. It's like he wrote a book and said, here, son, here's how you become a good man. And it starts off by saying, look, ethics is about living well. It's the science of achieving happiness. So happiness is something that is our goal. All living things, actually he's really just talking about people, but all people are craving or wanting happiness. But by happiness, he doesn't mean like, oh, I'm happy, things are good, let's party. He's talking about a quality of life, where our needs are met, we have companionship, we can, trust people, we are fulfilling our function, and so we're looking for a good life. Well, if our goal is happiness, he also points out that we have a function. Everything has a function. So the function of a knife is to cut. If the knife cuts well, we call it virtuous. It has the virtue, right? If it cuts poorly, we call it vicious. When we're talking about viciousness, Aristotle uses it in its original meaning of the word, not the way that we use it today. Aristotle uses the word vicious to mean something that has a vice or vices. Okay? Today we usually use the word vicious to mean like it was a vicious attack or a vicious dog, those kind of things. It usually is tied into some sort of violence. But that's not how he uses the word. So everything has a function. If you fulfill your function, you are virtuous. If you don't fulfill your function, you are vicious. So the knife that cuts well, virtuous. If it cuts badly, it's vicious. The distinctively human function, he says nothing else can do this except us, is to act with rationality, to be rational. So if we use reason, and we actually are reasonable, okay, we are virtuous. We can become virtuous. If we're not rational, we don't use the function of rationality, we're vicious. So our rationality tells us how to achieve our goal. So these are tied together. I have a function to be rational. Rationality will help me achieve my goal of happiness. My goal can be achieved in a couple of different ways, through intrinsic goods and instrumental goods. An intrinsic good, is something that we desire for its own sake. It's something that, it doesn't take me any further than that particular thing. In other words, an intrinsic good would be something like eating chocolate. Why do I do it? Because it's tasty, it's yummy, I like chocolate. So that would be an intrinsic good. It makes me happy to eat chocolate. An instrumental good would be something that is a means to a good. So, for example, eating an aspirin. I don't like to eat aspirins. If you've ever had one dissolve in your mouth, they're nasty. They taste bad. But it leads me to an eventual good, the good of getting rid of my headache or pain or inflammation or fever or whatever the aspirin is. So everything is either an intrinsic good or an instrumental good or both. Some things can be both. So what can be both? Well, if you like to play basketball, it can be both an intrinsic and an instrumental good. It's intrinsic because you get enjoyment out of it, right? You're having a good time, you're with your friends. It's instrumental because the exercise leads to good health, which is part of your happiness. It can lead to happiness. So playing basketball can be both intrinsic and instrumental. So what is money? I'll give you a second to think about that. Intrinsic or instrumental? Or both? It's instrumental. Okay? Because there's nothing about money that makes you happy except what it can do, right? Let's say you have a big pile of dollar bills here, right? It's just paper. It doesn't by itself make you happy. It's what you use it for. I take that money, I go to the store, I buy things. The thing I buy maybe makes me happy. Maybe I take that money, I go and I buy chocolate. So the money is instrumental to get the chocolate that is intrinsic. Aristotle says there is nothing greater than happiness. It is an intrinsic good, something that we seek for its own self, and it is the highest good. I've had students argue with me about, oh, well, I think love is higher than happiness. What's good about love? It makes you happy. Okay? I one time spent quite a while in class arguing with a young man who said power. Power was the most, the best thing. It was the highest good, and not only was I trying to get through to him, but the class was trying to explain that no, it's not power. What is it about power that is good? And it's like, well, it makes me happy. There you go. It's an instrumental good or an intrinsic good, depending. You're trying to get to the happiness. So happiness is the ultimate goal. Everything else is either a part or a means of happiness, and happiness is the final end. So we fulfill our function of rationality. It can help us achieve our goal. Our rationality tells us that in order to achieve the goal of happiness, okay, we need to develop our intellectual and our moral virtues. So we're not going to worry about intellectual virtues right now. This is an ethical course or an ethical section. So we're going to learn about our moral virtues. Our moral virtues. Well, he actually has like a list of 27 different virtues, but they all fall under some main headings. Things like courage, honesty, benevolence. So he says, virtue is learned. Now that's something that is different than what a lot of other philosophers will say. He says, virtue is learned. We're not born good. We're not born bad. We are essentially blank slates, and we can learn to be good or we can learn to be bad. So it depends on the mentors and the people that we're around that can help us learn to be good or bad. He says, basically, we need to find someone who is good and learn from them, and then practice what we've learned until it becomes a habit, and then that habit becomes part of our character. So Aristotle is concerned about character, being a good person, not just doing good actions, but being a good person. So I can learn to be a good person. And again, there are 4 steps to becoming a good person or having a good character. You have to learn the virtue, practice the virtue until it becomes a habit, and then that habit becomes your character. So of course, when I'm little, I learned from my family, I learned from my peers, I learned from watching society around me. But as I mature and I need more specialized learning of the various virtues, I might seek out, or I should seek out, a mentor. So let's take, for example, the virtue of courage. So how do I learn courage? Well, I probably would go find someone that has a reputation of being courageous, and probably someone older, and you'll see why in a minute. So I go find someone that has the reputation of being courageous, and let's say I'm a young man and I want to become a guard. So I would go find a guard who is notable for being courageous, has a heroic reputation perhaps, and I learn from him. I see what he does in different situations, and I study and practice those situations. So courage is not a single thing. Courage actually falls on a scale. So if this is courage, you can say, look, I might have a lot of courage, and if I have too much courage, I've moved out of the area of virtue, and I've crossed into the vice of what Aristotle calls foolishness or rashness. Now, if I have too little courage, okay, less courage might be fine, but if I have too little, I cross into the area called cowardice, and you all know what that word means. So, the amount of courage that you show depends on the situation and your ability. So it's flexible. Sometimes you show a lot of courage, sometimes you don't show a little courage, or sometimes you show a little courage, and the right amount for that situation and for your ability is the actual virtue. He says when you find that spot, that sweet spot of, just the right amount of courage for that situation, you have hit what he calls the golden mean. It is the right amount. It is somewhere on that scale of courage, and you are hitting the right amount. Now, you might be asking, well, what do you mean by too much courage? Can that be so? And why does he call it foolish? Well, if you show too much courage, you are going to wind up being pretty foolish. Think about it. You're in a bar or social situation, and five drunks come up and want to fight, and you alone try and take them on. That's too much courage. That's foolish, right? You're going to get your butt kicked. So the right thing to do in that case would be to try and talk it down, not do the fight, maybe go ahead and leave. So it depends again on the situation. So you find a mentor, you find this guard, and you practice with him, and you practice and practice all the different scenarios, so you know what to do in a scenario. It becomes a habit, so you don't have to stop and think, what should I do? You just do it automatically, and it becomes your character. So an example that he might use, right? You've been practicing with a guard, and now you are on your own. You're at the gates of Athens, and you've got your shield and your spear here, and you're guarding the gate. And here come 50 Trojans on horseback with their swords drawn. What do you do? Well, you don't stay and fight. That's too much courage. That's foolish. You're going to get slaughtered. So what do? You sound the alarm, you close the gates, you run, and you try to do what you can, but self-preservation is a wise thing as well. So you, like I said, sound the alarm and close the gate and run away. It's not cowardly to run away. In this case, it is a smart thing to do. On the other hand, if you're guarding the gate and you've got your shield and your spear, and here comes a little 6-year-old girl with a kitten, and you're like, oh no, and you close the gates and sound the alarm, that's not enough courage. It's also, pardon me, that's too much courage for that situation as well. It's also not right to say use your spear to stab the little girl or the kitten too and whatever. It's all you take on the marauder, the little girl with the kitten, and you say, stop, you can't come in here. Our city does not allow cats. So that's the right amount of courage. You wouldn't fight, you wouldn't run away. You would stand and not fight, but simply stop her and put up some resistance. Some of the other virtues, like benevolence. Okay, let's say you and Jeff Bezos from Amazon are walking along, okay? And someone comes up to you and says, I'm trying to get up money for lunch. Could you help me out? You're a student. You pull out $1 and you give the person $1. That's probably the right amount of money for the situation. It's what you can give. Now, if Jeff Bezos pulls out $1 and gives the person $1 and says, here you go, you're going to think, you greedy SOB, right? You can help them out with a lot more than $1. Benevolence means giving to others. So you have given what you can. So you've hit the right amount of benevolence. You don't want to give more than that, because then you're not going to be able to afford lunch. And if you give less than that, it might be considered selfish. So you give the $1. That's the right amount of that virtue for you. That's your ability. Jeff Bezos can give a whole lot more money without harming him at all, and so even though he's doing the exact same action as you are, giving someone a dollar bill, he is not being virtuous because he is capable of giving a lot more money than a dollar bill and it not hurt him at all. So it's context sensitive and it's dependent on your self. It's not an absolute right. It is relative to yourself. You want to do the right thing because it is the right thing and your character has developed to tell you that, and you have learned that, and you have learned it and practiced it and repeated it, and now you have a good character. So you don't have to stop and think about things. I mean, if you look at it like this, so ask yourself, you go through the drive-through and you get your change back and they give you too much change and you're like, ooh, what do I do, right? And you're thinking. Some of you might right away say, oh, keep it. Some of you might say right away, give it back. But for most of us, we have a little bit of a moral dilemma. We look at it, we look up at the person at the drive-through and back the money, and we think about it. And a lot of it depends on how much money they gave us back and what we think is going to happen. So like they give you 37 cents back and you realize that's, maybe you think that's not going to help me that much. So you think, I'll do the right thing. And you're like, oh, here, you gave me too much money back. And you are being, noble, at least in your mind. Or you might look at it and go, it's 37 cents, not going to hurt them, helps me, right? And so you save it and you keep it. Or it might be a situation where maybe they give you, $5 too much, right? And you look at that and you might be thinking, okay, that's going to buy me lunch on another day. And you think, I'm keeping that, and you drive away. Or you might think, they're going to notice that, and the person who's working the drive-up window is going to get in trouble. So you give it back. Really, it depends a lot on how we feel about what's going on with us and others and the situation. This is one of the things that's important about Aristotle's virtue theory, is that there's flexibility in it. So he would allow you to be flexible about whether or not you keep the money. So I can tell you the story about one time this was like years ago. I was about 20, and I went through In-N-Out, and I got my food, and I set it on the car seat, and the guy turned around and left and didn't take my money, and I was like, sweet. So I drove away, and I got a free meal. Well, a week or so later, I went to In-N-Out again, and same thing happened. Gave me my food, turned around, walked away. I sat there for a second, wondering what to do. He didn't come back, so I drove away and I got another free meal. And then it began to kind of weigh on my conscience, and I thought, well, I really should be paying for this. So I went to In-N-Out again, and again, the guy did not take my money. Now I had driven there to order my food with the intent, I'm going to pay for it this time, right? So the guy gave me the food, turned away, didn't take my money. And I decided, no, I have to pay for this. And I said to him, excuse me. And he turned around and he said, what? And I said, never mind. And I drove away. My ethical desire to do the right thing and pay for my food was immediately overtaken by my emotion of, well, this guy was just a jerk to me, so I'm not going to pay it. Aristotle doesn't want us to have these kind of dilemmas where we worry about things or our emotions interfere with it. The right thing to do is to pay for your food. And so if I have developed a moral character of honesty in this case, I would give the money back if I was given too much, or I would pay for my food at In-N-Out. And even if the guy turned around and was a jerk to me, I would still give him the money because I bought food, not went to a place for free food. So the idea here is that you've got to spend time developing these virtues. You have to learn the virtues and the right amount of virtue for yourself and in different situations. And of course, then you must practice it until you've practiced it so many times, it becomes a habit and part of your character. It's actually a very good theory. Aristotle really has some good ideas here, but there's just really one problem with this, and that's that it takes a long time. You've got to learn things and practice, make it a habit, and acquire a moral character. You know, if you have a moral character, your actions will be, moral. It's just like part of your second nature. How does that happen? Well, it's like learning to play a musical instrument, right? You pick it up and you fumble it, and somebody shows you maybe how to play a guitar, how to hold it, and you're not very good, but slowly and surely, and the more you practice, you get better at it, and you get better at it, and at some point you get to a point where you may not even have to think about it a lot. It becomes like motor memory, and you can play the chord changes without having to look at your fingers or really think about it that much. It's become part of you. That's what he wants. It takes time. And again, that's probably the one flaw with this. I don't know if you can call it a flaw. I mean, it's the process of learning. You develop this. It's one of the reasons that they did not want their citizens to be politicians before the age of 30, hopefully, 35. Hopefully, you were 50 when you went into politics and civic duty, because by then you would have had enough time to develop some of those virtues and to understand what virtue was and how to carry it out. So it's a very good theory. I happen to like it a lot myself. You can live a virtuous life, and that contributes to your happiness, your good life. And of course, it contributes to others. And if they're living a virtuous life, then that contributes to your happiness as well, and the overall happiness of society. So, it was a popular theory, but not for long. What happened is after 400 years, when the church began to take over in Western civilization, all theories other than theological ethics were thrown out. So they were like, well, you don't listen to Aristotle. You need to see what it says in Scripture here. You need to see what it says in the Bible, and that will tell you what's right and wrong. You don't have to use reason. You use godliness to figure this out. Fortunately, it wasn't forgotten entirely, and it has had a resurgence. There have been, in the last 30 or 40 years, a number of people writing on virtue ethics, and it's, again, a good idea. Aristotle's virtue ethics, or virtue theory, and your goals and functions, and how to become a virtuous person. Okay, I think that's enough for Aristotle, and I will see you next time.